Howdy, folks. Today's lesson is going to be about note taking. So before we want to get started, I want you to pause this video and do a quick review. What do you know about note taking already? Like, why is it useful? Where do you use it? And then what strategies do you particularly employ? And hopefully your strategy is not copy off the person next to you. So take a second and think about that. Today's material is gleaned largely from a podcaster and educational researcher, Jennifer Gonzalez. She runs a blog called The Cult of Pedagogy, as well as a podcast. And so she has synthesized 20 years of research looking at studies and papers written about the idea of note-taking. What is effective note-taking practices that encourage students to learn, that help students learn? Because remember, in my class, number one goal is that learning comes first. Anything I can do to increase that is going to be of benefit both to me and to you. Like, that's our goal here. So remember that when I talk about note-taking, that it's not just for a lecture like this, right? Note-taking is a good idea for any area where you're trying to learn or remember something, right? It could be videos, readings, research, field trips, meetings, whatever it is, even a meeting with your teacher, right? You have a conference with your teacher. Take notes on that, because maybe they're going to give you some good pointers about how to fix a paper or how to redo a science project, or what you need to do to pass this class, right? You want to remember that information. And so note-taking is one of the best ways that you can encourage your brain to actually remember this information. So if you haven't yet already, practice taking notes. As we're going through this video about note-taking, take notes. Grab a sheet of paper. Let's get started. So why does note-taking matter? Well, number one, it has been scientifically proven, studied and studied and studied again, that students who take notes improve their own learning. Simple. Like, that is one true fact that we cannot deny. Because I bet if I split this class in half and I said, okay, you have to take notes, and you don't get to take notes. Who do you think would do better when it came to quizzes and exams and papers? Which half would you want to be? I'd want to be on the note, or on the half that was forced to take notes, not the side that was prevented from taking notes, right? It's intuitive, and I'll explain why as we go through this. And additionally, note-taking is a life skill. Can you imagine a scenario where you're in a meeting with your boss, or maybe you're your own boss and you're in a meeting with your client and you're having a conversation about, okay, here's the work we need to get done. Or maybe you're fixing their house. Be like, okay, here's what I want done with my living room because you're a contractor, or here's what I want done with my website because you're a web designer, whatever it is. You have that meeting with that client or your boss, and you walk out of that meeting and you don't remember a thing. You're like, what was I supposed to do? Do you know how unprofessional that looks? To be like, hey, I know we just had that meeting, but I was just calling because I couldn't have been bothered to write any of that stuff down. It's a memory technique. Not only will you have that for those notes for later review, but it also is the first step in helping you remember. Because note-taking matters. Because as you are going through a conversation or listening to a lecture or watching a video or reading a textbook, keeping your brain engaged, not only to take information in, but to get information out, is important. And so if I'm reading something, taking that information in, and then I'm putting it back out onto my paper, that is the start of learning, right? That is the first element of making those neural connections work for me. So kind of the steps to learning something that note-taking almost checks off all of them are, number one, you got to gather the information you need to see. And usually if you're sitting and watching a video or listening to a lecture, all the relevant information is right there. Then you need to code it. It's called encoding in your brain. It's basically you're prepping information for storage in your brain. You can't take a perfect digital mental image of me saying these things to you, or of a textbook, right? You have to condense those things into a way that your brain can actually store them. And then you actually have to store them. You got to put them in your memory. And you've got to be able to put them in your memory and practice getting them out of your memory, right? The analogy I like to use is a donut. You have this beautiful donut. You went to the donut store and you got a beautiful donut. Maybe you got a box of donuts, a whole box of donuts, but you can only eat a couple. You're like, oh man, I really want to save these donuts. But you're not just going to leave them out uncovered on the counter. That's a terrible donut. You've got to like wrap up that donut carefully so it doesn't get all dried out. That's like coating it, getting your information ready. You have to store it somewhere where you can get back at it. I'm not going to store these donuts like on the top shelf of a drawer in my attic, right? That would be dumb because I'm going to eat those donuts now. I got to get them someplace where I can put them someplace where I can get to them. And then I've got to be able to retrieve those donuts because if I don't practice retrieving those donuts, they're going to sit there. They're going to get old. They're going to get nasty. That's what note taking does. Gathers that relevant information, sorts it in such a way that you can remember it, right? Remember, notes are in your words, and it helps store that information in your brain. Here's one that I struggle with, but I'll go with the science on it, is the more that you encode, the more you take notes, the more you write down on your notes, the more you store, the more you learn. It's directly related to how much you're able to kind of recall when it comes to be time to process and use that information. Third point is to have a strategy, have an idea about here's how I'm going to take notes. Personally, I use the Cornell note system, where I've got key points kind of highlighted throughout my notes. I take the actual notes, like whatever information I think is important to write down, and then I try to summarize what's going on here. So took notes all throughout my lecture. Last 5 minutes of class, I sit and write a summary of here's what I learned. Again, it's all about me processing that information, not just taking that in. Some things to check out, Cornell notes and sketchnoting. I'll put those up on my website as well. Adding visuals really helps notes. So if you're a doodler, awesome. Use that to your advantage. I'll show you, see if you can see some of my notes there in the small image. I'm big on diagrams. I'm big on graphic organizers and like breakout boxes in my notes and adding, short little doodles to help me remember things. Turns out that is a way of processing information and getting it out of your brain and associating just text with something else. And second to last, pausing and revising your notes also boosts learning, especially if you're doing it while you're learning. So if you're reading or watching a video, don't read and watch all that video through. Watch half of it and press pause. See what you can remember. See what you can do to add to your notes halfway through. And you don't always have control over this, right? So pausing a lecture requires me to stop during the lecture and ask you guys to write down and revise what you have taken notes on so far. And that's kind of what we do our brain dumps about, where we'll pause, download our brain, see what we can remember, then get back into it. Lastly, here's something that's up for debate, is handwritten notes are probably the best for memory retention. However, I will concede that digital notes are easy and easily revised, right? If I'm handwriting notes and I miss something and I want to keep things organized and add some information somewhere higher up on my page, tough to do when I'm handwriting notes. Very easy to do when I'm digitally typing notes. Do keep in mind, though, if you do have a digital device, it's bad for distractions, right? For people who are prone to distractions, have your one device up, throw your phone in the next room, and use a pen and a paper. But basically, the thing that matters most is that you take responsibility and ownership of your own note-taking practices. And that's truly what it's about. You figuring out what works best for you to take notes. And what works best for you is not, I don't take notes, Mr. Estad. What works best is, here's the way in which I take notes. So review some of the strategies that I have posted up, watch some of these other videos, and good luck with your note-taking journey this semester.